Ever since the governor and legislative leaders said in mid-September that the software or internet services tax, the so-called high-tech tax, should be repealed, it was pretty much doomed. A Springfield attorney played a key role in building the challenge to the tech tax. Scott Foster is a specialist in business and entrepreneurial law. He's a partner at Bulkley Richardson Law Firm here in Springfield. You were preparing a court challenge to the tech tax, correct, as it's commonly called. You said basically, it's impossible to figure out. It's vague and unconstitutional.
That was the argument. It was unconstitutionally vague, and anybody who was reading it, who was actually in the industry, they'd read the words that were used, and they said, well, we can't comply with it. We don't know what we're supposed to do. And that was the interesting thing, is none of the companies said we won't comply, said we refuse to comply. It was simply, we can't comply. And once I started hearing that again and again from the business owners, and they would say, well, what can we do? They would be calling me up, clients would be calling me up. I said, well, if you really can't comply and you don't understand it, you could file a lawsuit. We could seek an injunction from a judge saying the law is so vague that a man of common intelligence, which is a test, can't understand it by the plain meaning of the language. And I said, you guys are certainly not of common intelligence, and you're specialists in your field. You're the ones who are tasked with knowing it. If you can't figure it out, it must be an unconstitutionally vague law. And interestingly, the more I talked about it, I've never had a single person in the legislature and no lawyers who have come up to me and said, you're wrong. That's not correct. What the arguments were was, well, where's the irreparable harm, which is how you get an injunction? Right. Or, boy, that looks like a tough challenge and the state's going to fight it hard. And there were always elements of how difficult it might be. There was never a single challenge about the fact that the law was somehow defensible.
One of the things I know you've talked about in interviews, software services was talked about, and you said nobody talks that way. Nobody calls what they do software service. Nobody knows what that means, and that's what the tax is on.
That was the idea. It was the design, implementation, modification of pre-written software. And pre-written software had another meaning of standardized software, and you had to dive into this, and you got down to the point where the DOR was trying to figure out what it was and said, we believe that somebody who writes a macro in Excel is doing a taxable service. And at that point, I think the argument tipped into the absurd. And everybody was realizing, okay, that can't possibly be what you meant, what the legislators were meaning. And then there's another term, information management services, which is another term not used in the industry. Information management services were not subject to the tax. So overnight, everybody became information management specialists. And that's all the services they were providing.
I know it really, when you looked at the human angle of this, it really got kind of crazy. Businesses, literally, they didn't know how to apply the tax, what it applied to. If they called themselves one thing, they were safe, as you just said. If they called themselves something else, they were taxed, it appeared. There was a September 20th filing deadline looming. Concerns about penalty. I mean, people were literally saying, if I'm not doing what I can't figure out I'm supposed to do, I can face civil or maybe even criminal penalties.
Right. The willful failure to withhold taxes in Massachusetts is a felony. It has a penalty up to 5 years in jail. So these business owners were facing the real prospect of jail time. And what I kept saying to business owners, I said, whatever you do, don't say, I'm throwing up my hands because I can't comply, because that's a willful failure to withhold. Always talk about I'm trying to understand it, I'm doing my best. I said, and the Department of Revenue was voicing some similar things, saying we're going to work with you during this, quote, transition period, which is now fortunately no longer the case. There's no transition, it's gone.
I had a conversation with a legislative leader who said, government's taking all kinds of criticism on this. He said, I had phone messages and calls, people saying, how stupid are you people to pass something like this? And he said, we didn't do this in a vacuum. There were business leaders, there were people involved in this, that business lobbies were consulted. They signed off on the tax when the Speaker and the Senate President came forward and said, we're going to push for the repeal, the final, I think, nail in the coffin. Right. There were representatives of some of the business community there. A gentleman from Massachusetts Competitive Partnership said, business leaders underestimated, he said, the negative impact and the reputational hit. What a great phrase that the Commonwealth would take on this. How is the government-business relationship impacted by all this, do you think?
I think this highlighted a gap that was understood before, but really wasn't understood about the depth of that gap. And that's between the tech companies and the politicians. And the tech companies tend to be represented by the Goliaths of the industry, the Googles, the Microsofts, the EMCs, those with thousands of employees with large bankrolls that can afford lobbyists. And what's not represented are the 100 employee and under firms, of which I saw one estimate earlier said there could be 10,000 of these firms across the Commonwealth. These organizations don't have a voice. They don't participate in their chamber, local chambers of commerce, because their clients aren't necessarily local. They're getting clients from around the world. They don't participate in other trade groups because the other groups tend to focus more on networking activities. So they'll network with other people. They'll talk about how to price jobs and how to work together and how to go out and put together a competitive bid. But they've never focused on politics. They've never focused on the policy. This really woke them up. So a new group that's come about that I was part of on the ground floor of, called the Spark Coalition, is designed to be the voice of these previously underrepresented tech companies that really represent the backbone of the tech industry overall in terms of employees and number of businesses. And their needs, their goals, their perspective are very different than the mega companies.
A lot of the internet companies, if you will, in many cases, and let me get you to wear one of your other hats for a minute. Yeah. You're a partner, you're a founder of something called Valley Venture Mentors. We've had you on the program in the past many times there. A lot of new business startups that you folks look at to see, can we help you, can we get you going, can we boost the economy here in the area through you. A lot of these are small operations, mom and pop, and these are people that say, you know, government is the problem. They come through, I'm just in a little shop and I'm putting out something that I want to sell around the world through the internet. I don't have to have a store, I don't have to have a lot of, and the government says, are you doing this? Are you complying with that? Are you doing? So, I mean, there's been kind of a natural, and disdain probably is too strong a word, but I'll use it, a desire to just keep away from government.
Right.
They've realized they can't do that,
right.
Apparently, huh?
I think that's come out, right, is that the failure to be represented, the failure to have a seat at the table led to this. And did it get fixed quickly? Yes, it did, after the tech industry got together and made their voices heard and proved that they do have a voice and it can be heard. So I think there's a big lesson. You're going to see a lot more of these local tech companies or these smaller tech companies being represented going forward. And in fact, both the governor's office and legislative leaders have already reached out to the Spark Coalition to say, we'd like to have you engaged in our caucus. We'd like to have you coming to our meetings. Let's have more of a dialogue going forward so we don't have this kind of fiasco again. So really, if you look at it objectively, there were thousands and thousands of man hours and woman hours dedicated to understanding this, to getting it repealed, to avoiding the damage. Those thousands of hours can't be recouped. They're gone. And they could have been used by these business owners and by others to come up with a new product, to sell more of their product, to actually grow the economy. So there's even though it's gone, there's really quite a hit that happened to these companies for this month and a half while it was still up in the air.
Let me ask you about that, and with about a minute left, that phrase again, the reputational hit. How do business people, do you think, locally, nationwide, really worldwide now, look at this? Do they just say, there's crazy Massachusetts again? Or do they say, you know what, they saw a mistake, you know, new Coke and others like that, do away with the Twinkie. Right. They saw a mistake, they jumped on it, they fixed it. What's the view?
I think they fixed it is becoming the mantra that we're trying to support and that we're encouraging the tech owners to embrace, is everybody can make a mistake. A mistake was made, it happened. How do we deal with it? How did the legislative leaders react to it? They reacted in terms of legislative speed at a supersonic rate. I mean, it was blindingly fast for how legislators normally operate. This was within a few days of them really coming back into session and starting to think about the issue after the August vacation, that the announcements are coming out, we're ready to repeal it. So I think there's a sense of forgiveness, of a mistake was made, how do we avoid it in the future?
Scott Foster, thanks for your perspective.
Thank you.